I'm sure there are masses of questions, and we need to see your hands. Would you like to take them one by one or in batches so you can hear what the audience has to say?
You know, sometimes it's better to take a few.
Let's take a few, 3 or 4 at a time.
Yes, if people don't ask.
Now, Patrick, where's the mic? You got it? Do you want to come down, and then we'll just get the mic down here, and then we'll just select a few, and we'll move backwards. So if we don't get you in the first batch, we will get you a bit later. So let me just start at the front. Are there people at the front who urgently want to ask a question? Yes, one over there. Let's start with you. More hands, please, so I can see where you are.
Hi, I'm Anna from the philosophy department. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm still putting it together in my head, so I'm not sure if my question will make any sense. I was just trying to put together 2 of the things that I think you said. One of them is that your mother tongue is very important for making, as I think you said, mature contact with the complexities of ethical life or the ethical. And you talk about how people in Africa need their languages, their mother tongues to do that. Yet you also spoke in the beginning about how you spoke to some people, if I remember it correctly, in India, who don't have the conceptual resources yet to speak and to think about development in the way that you would like, or about education. And I wonder whether you could put those 2 together. At the one hand, they might be lacking resources. At the other hand, they might have resources that they need for their ethical lives. Do you also recognize this tension? And if you don't, how do you think I could resolve it? Thank you.
Some more.
Do you want some more? Okay. Anyone else at the front been thinking? Yes, there's over there, Patrick.
Thank you. Katrina Nihul from the German department. My question is about the relationship between the slow and the fast. I was really struck by what you said about humanities being a training in slow reading, and your critique of attempts to reform the Human Development Index in terms of short-termism, you know, that education is too slow. And yet at the same time we face planetary challenges that require us to act quickly. How do you resolve that tension?
Questions about tensions. Someone else at the front?
Anyone else here?
We can move back, so just put your hand up so we can see them. Yes, over there. Great.
Three from the English department. I was just basically extremely taken by the anecdote of Matha Khatao that you mentioned, and the idea of basically applying oneself to the best of one's ability. So I was just wondering how much of it is linked to education. How about an alternate voice of intelligence? A development that can completely steer clear of institutionalized education. So this education that we were discussing right now, which calls for a kind of an adopted language to become the medium of communication, particularly in the colonized context, how much of their own voice do you think they're losing, the colonized people, the subaltern, in translation? Thank you.
Wonderful. That's 3. You want to take a few more?
Maybe I will just do one more.
Yes.
You want? I can see that you think. I mean, one feels a little. Yes, one feels a little old because you think I can solve all problems. And what I can do is state problems and I share them with you. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay, I have no solutions. I negotiate with failure to an extent. Who wins loses here, isn't it? I think all 3 of you know that. So I begin from there. Okay, now, it was too quick about that mature judgment thing. You see, what I was saying about mother tongue, I've said before at greater length. I mean, at this stage of the game, you can't really think of anything very new. But there are some things that stay and you repeat them. And this is an idea that I repeat, which is expressed in my rethinking comparativism. So if you want to see it in detail, you should go look at it. Ashish Nandi, by the way, said that it was the best talk he'd ever heard me give. I think he's wrong. It's only because he could understand it. But at any rate, that talk says that, and I think that, and I'm not alone in thinking this. I mean, I kind of got it from reading Melanie Klein very, 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 very carefully. And you know, also, if you really want to like completely condition it, you should read the Subversion du sujet, la dialectique du désir. That one, like, that's, I mean, I am shown to be a kind of idiot, humanist, conservative, moral, stupid person. In that, if you read that one carefully, the translation is all wrong. But at any rate, so what we are trying to say is the first language, and I don't normally use the words mother tongue, and the first language can in fact be so many languages altogether. Mother tongue I'm using because the Africans say mother tongue. It's the mother tongue project. In English, that's what they say. But the first language is invented by the child. But please read the Lacan essay once again to see how he imagines it, because he's a poet. Freud is an ethical philosopher with ethical instantiation, body-mind relationship. But Lacan is wild, and so his imagining of how it happens, the signifier catches, is fantastic. But I'm just saying it in kind of a meat and potatoes way. So the child invents a language, because that's what human beings, or not just human. I wish I could talk about higher primates, but I must answer the other questions. The child invents a language. The parents learn it. And since the parents have access to a language, for us with a name, but in that sense, from the African powerful example, not necessarily with a name that is a proper name. It's a common name, if you like. So therefore, the child's language gets inserted into a language with a history and a future, which will continue and absorb the child into it. On the other hand, as the child is learning, this is before reason. I mean, the infant, this is before reason. So only one language is learned like that. It doesn't have to be, it can be the language of the nurse if you're tremendously rich. But the thing is, there's no kind of value judgment about, oh, mothers. But this language is learned by animating the meta-psychological processes in the psychological machine. Because, as I say, this is not learned self-consciously. Imagine how hard it is to learn languages when you know how to learn languages. But this one is learned in that way, right? So therefore, mixed up with the infant's relationship to body parts and so on, it really lays the foundation of an ethical semiosis, a system which is always animated again if one happens to be interrupted by that kind of unconditional ethical call. So this is not the mature judgment part. The mature judgment part is the conditions which contaminate the unconditional, because the unconditional ethics can be good or bad. I mean, Captain Ahab wants to kill the whale, but the relationship is just an unbelievable kind of, this is a very masculine example, but you know what I mean. So, let it be. That's what I meant by just, that I wasn't talking about the mother tongue and the mother and the mature judgment together. And the persons to whom I spoke, see, India is a big place, all right? And I talked about two different groups to whom I spoke. One is up top there, the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS as it's affectionately called, in Delhi, the capital city. And so they're studying developing societies. There are lots of foreign fellows there, etc. And the other group, also Indian, one vote, one citizen, so also Indian, were the subaltern groups. And what I was trying to say was that at both ends, they lacked resources for a certain kind of epistemological performance. Too much, too little, excess and lack, if you like. So do I know how to reorganize this tension? No, of course not. This tension is what is the persistent practice generation after generation. It will not be, subalternity is not going to stop. Subalternization is not going to stop, although we want to get rid of it. Nor will political power stop. That's why, to an extent, this humanities supplementary effort has to be a persistent, and you know, one can actually gender people like Gramsci who have talked about persistent stuff by mentioning generation, you know, because human beings and top primates are born in order to get these kinds of things implanted so that one goes away from self-interest and so on. So therefore, it's no, I don't think this tension can ever be reorganized, and the desire to reorganize this tension makes people begin to fool themselves. You know, that they're actually doing this, and they say, oh, they're really doing it themselves, and so on and so forth. It's a very sort of Christian idea that suffering brings peace, and if they really become, if they are successful, then the world will be better, etc. I'm sorry, I've lived too long. But so that was the first one. The second one, slow reading. See, this is also a very, very important question. Planetary problems that require not quick solutions, but solutions that cannot be slow. See, this is also a tension, and I have actually been writing about this one for even before I could think the thoughts that I now can think rightly or wrongly. Remember, those of you who have kind of read some of my earlier stuff, I used to say about feminism that there is a for feminism which is very slow. You have to change mindsets. And there is an against sexism which must hit hard and immediately, so that you actually do the two things together, as it were, so interrupting each other. So therefore, I completely sympathize with you. I do not think it's a question of sacrificing one for the other. This is why I was talking about limits, because quite often what happens is that the kind of idealistic, individualist, humanities folks think this is all that is needed, and the so-called activists who think the humanities people are living in an ivory tower will say, oh yes, if you have leisure, then you can do that kind of thing. We who are at the picket line, we know that, you know, it has to be yesterday. This is why I said us and theming is not a good idea. We are in fact complicit. We are in fact, I mean, anyone who thinks about corporate funding, for example, is complicit. Anyone who, and in this world today, anyone who wants the state, who is resisting the state, in order to get the state to give more welfare, is complicit. So therefore, the idea of, and that saying yes to the enemy, which is Asiya Jabar, that's imaginative activism, being able to say yes to the enemy. It's an incredible stuff. That's also in that film, by the way, if you watch it, Concerning Violence. So I'm not saying that you should give up one for the other. What I'm really saying is that even for the quick fix work, you need a mindset which has been slowly trained. It's like the body. You may want to do hard manual labor, but hey, if you don't actually keep this is why cheap labor is cheap. And in fact, if you look at accounts of how Marx is writing, how it is possible to, with slavery, to forget about caring about the subsistence of the working class because the laborers are not the same, etc. So therefore, if you want to destroy bodies, fine. But if it is going to be appropriate manual labor, the body has to be prepared slowly. On the other hand, that doesn't happen. Remember that song written by Shukanto about the rickshaw pullers? Huh? The thing is that if you look at the rickshaw pullers, you'll see their incredible thin legs full of these corded muscles. That is not a slow training of the body so that it can work well. These people are oppressed. So therefore, the idea, see, I've been hit 4 times in Britain, you know? Hit, once concussed by white people. You know why? Every time, and I understand this, every time when I was running. Because what is this? An older Asian female takes labor as a luxury? This is a real problem with, it's a kind of working class resentment mixed with racism. So, imagine that. I've been hit hard. So with dogs, The Guardian didn't think that this was a story that they wanted to tell, which also I found very amusing and interesting. And once, in fact, in Cambridge, so that I had to be taken to Jesus College Hospital, concussed. So therefore, this idea of building, being able to build the body so it works well, and being able to build the mind so that it can, in fact, use the digital, which is like a wild horse. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying give it up and only the leisurely people. You know, the people I work with among the landless illiterate, they don't have an awful lot of leisure. In fact, I have to give special holidays for sowing and reaping, for example, you know, which people don't have normally in schools, etc. So therefore, I see the tension, but that's what I was with you too. I see the tension, but keep the tension alive and use it rather than contaminate one by the other, rather than choose one thinking my way is best. You know, and well, I could go on further. And these planetary problems, they're not going to be solved tomorrow. The desire for social justice, in fact, the willingness, the rearrangement of desire is what we don't have with these planetary problems. Enforcement goes only so far. Then, matha khatao, make the head work. You see, this is something that has been very useful and I've said this before, with these landless illiterate, the subalterns, to say, you know, that you see, because of accepting this wretchedness as normal, especially the incredible, this is what Fernand Braudel would call longue durée. So the colonialism stuff is very fine. They don't know anything about colonialism. Frankly, I could tell you many stories. But this stuff, this caste opposition, etc., this is the longue durée. This is the long-term structures working under the narrative history that we think is history. And so I would say to them, and so that longue durée has also told them, just as we under colonialism used to think that we were, the sort of middle class, gentrified middle class like mine, that we are a second-class culture. You know, I mean, people would tell stories. You know, in Britain, they have these newspapers, and they pick up the newspapers and put down the sixpence and walk away. No one steals anything. Right? So you see, this kind of thing, this sense that you are yourself a second-class culture, taking your wretchedness as normal, this is the greatest harm that you can do to people, right? So this thing, one can break by saying, no, Borolok, that is to say, the big people, they make the head work. And Chotolok, the small people like you are allowed only to make the body work. This they really understood. You know, like other people's children, this also travels. And then the difficulty of making the head work when you're punished for intellectual labor and you are expected to obey, so that even trying to make the head work, they're saying, Didi, sister, we do what you say. And I lose it. What can one do? You know, so therefore, the idea of matha khatano, it's all very well to have the alternative voices of intelligence, but the luxury of cultivating the alternative voice is here compromised. Again, I'm saying this is not like one way is correct, by the absolute necessity to enter the mainstream and to develop the intuitions of democracy so that they can vote. So therefore, the anthropological gesture of collecting. I mean, one of my cousins is collecting songs and stuff all the time. And he could not understand that he had to, because I had asked him, he was a physics doctorate, I had asked him to teach mathematics, but he could not understand that you have to teach another way, and so he's still collecting his material. And you see, what happens is that the illiterate people, quite often, because not all illiterate people, but smart illiterate people, because they have not been ruined by bad education, are in fact quite amazingly smart. But you cannot, therefore, support illiteracy, alas. You have to improve the system of education. And so this illiterate guy, Nimai Lohar, says to me, Didi, I won't name him because you seem to be a Bengali, you might know who he is, so I won't name the guy who couldn't teach mathematics, but Nimai did, the illiterate guy. I said, Didi, you know, he is never going to be the same as us. Whereas Ben, the white English guy who has learned Bengali, goes there, stays there, Benda will be one of us, but this other Da is never going to be one of us. They're not idiots. They understand that this collector's feeling, you know, like let's keep the pre-capitalist wonderful authenticity alive and so on. So of course they're losing. Education is violent. Whoever says divine violence, said Benjamin. Of course, you rearrange desires. We have all been violated by education. It's, you do not remain, you know, in the state of nature, so-called, when you choose to be educated. It is not something that you can just say is sweet and nice and good and so on and teaches you values and virtues. No, sir. It violates your being in yourself and so on and so forth. So, again, a contamination, a carefulness, so that you begin to think about what it is that you're up to and how different it is to teach children who at home have nothing but trauma from teaching middle-class children with books in their houses. Oh, have you hugged your kid today? It doesn't work in the villages because that's how the benevolent feudals behave towards them anyway. And they see through it, can't say anything about it. So therefore, I'm sorry this is such a long answer, but these three questions were really wonderful questions which really came home to what I was talking about. Yes.
Are you happy to take some more?
Yeah,
I was very struck by what you said of the fast and the slow and working with tensions, because the striking thing about needing to act quickly on something like climate change is that we don't.
Yes.
The targets are all there, the aim's there, people know about climate change, but the fact is climate emissions are rising across the world and will continue to rise as far as we can foresee. So we know they have this urgency, but we don't know how to act. And that is a very pressing, complex world to live in. And that's where I think your refusal to accept the contradictions, but to work with the tensions is extremely illuminating. Right, more questions. We have one at the front, and then we'll move back. I can use this mic. So you stay there, Patrick. I'll just use this one for the first question.
Thank you for this, because it's also really important because humanities is really under a lot of attack within the UK education system, and the idea of slowness really jars with the kind of speed we are supposed to be dealing with in UK academia. I want to draw on three things that you said, and one was the striking thing that education is seen as a kind of a, you know, it's slow to understand, so it shouldn't be part of maybe, and yet education has become such a kind of mobilizing force where, if you think of the figure of Malala, right? The lack of education, the attack on education, etc., etc. And yet within the same train of thought, I was also thinking of two other things, which is linked to this first point, is about how I agree when you said, you know, Eurocentrism is Eurocentric itself, you're right? And at the same time, the critique of Eurocentrism is Eurocentric itself, absolutely. And at the same time, also saying that some of the closest conversation of humanities is happening with human rights theorists. Is that? Did I understand you right? No. No? Okay. Say that. So. Because some of the struggles that one is finding in terms of these three examples is how often various human rights activists who are oriented humanistically are often saying, you know, these multi-layered academic accounts and nuances are irrelevant. Why are you critiquing, say something like, why are you critiquing Malala in terms of what has happened thereafter? Or how does the idea of education work thereafter? So the division within the left itself between who want quick solutions or who want quick experiences within the idea of humanities and development is kind of quite critical to understand between the slowness and the fastness of things. So I'm trying to wrap this up to say I'm kind of bringing together various sets of thoughts of thinking the various strands of humanities, which is meant to be the slowness and fastness within activist politics and the tensions within it, and how, whether you have experienced any of that, would be interesting to hear about.
Okay, let's see. Questions in the middle, at the back. There's a mic right at the back. Yes.
You talked about the self-trivialization of the humanities, and I wonder if you could, if we might also elaborate on that in terms of a self-trivialization of the university as a whole, which has really reduced itself to a servicer of employment markets in pursuit of often dirty money. I wondered if there's anything that you might counsel here about the necessary transformations of the university and not just the humanities.
And one more question, with the mic closer.
Oh, sorry, is that any better? My name's Paul McFadden, I'm from the Politics Department in Newcastle University, and I suppose I'd like to ask a question which follows on about this more general question about what the university is. I was struck very much by the content of what you were saying. Seemed to be very suited to where we are, which is a very grand hall and a very grand old university, and we're talking about things like complicity with the longue durée structures of capitalism, and how we as workers in the university might seek to subvert that by promoting a form of aesthetic education and attempting to change ourselves so that we can change minds which can possibly have some notion of what it is to live in a democracy and can engage with that democracy. And I was hoping that you might be able to speak a little bit more about that.
All right. Now there's a tension to talk about. And we'll just get one more question over here.
Thanks. Mine's a quick one. Would you say a little bit more about what work you're currently finishing or doing on Dubois?
Yes, Dubois. I gave the Dubois lectures in 2009 at Harvard, and Henry Louis Gates Jr. was completely surprised that I was actually speaking on Dubois. He thought, I would come and say, love me, I'm an Indian. But the thing is that, Dubois had described the exodus of the slaves during the Civil War, away from the plantations and joining the Union Army in droves. He had called this a general strike. And of course, it's not a general strike according to the definition of general strike. Anybody knows. And so people told him roundly, including his Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer, who didn't tell him but wrote, that Dubois was just wrong. My question was, because I'm a humanities person, why did somebody so smart, and somebody, I go to his personal collection of books in Ghana, and this is why I'm constantly going to Ghana, and his Capital Volume 1 is like torn and tattered. So you don't even have to ask, did he read Marx? So why would such a person make such a mistake that, the copy editors of history can catch? So I asked myself, what could this be? And so that's the book. That's the book. And I'm going more and more toward Pan-Africanism, but that's what I'm doing as a book right now. Okay, so let me go now to the questions. See, the thing about human rights. Now, I myself, of course, am a member of Human Rights Commission in India. And because I'm an Indian citizen, I'm also a member of the Human Rights Institute sometimes a board member, we rotate in and out, at Columbia. See, as I've been saying again and again, I am not interested in trashing, except Ken Pruitt, I trashed and I'll tell him. But he's just a human being. But I'm not interested in undermining work, you know, but what I'm interested, because I don't think one way is correct, but I will give you my critique, which then will have to be integrated with the fact that I am folded in with the human rights people, okay? I mean, Amnesty International I'm folded in with, to the extent that before Aung San Suu Kyi came to Colombia, they asked me to launch a high-level, and Amartya came and spoke, Maung Zarni came and spoke, a high-level conference so that people would know about ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, Burma, right? So it's not like I'm not working with them. So having said this, let me say that human rights was founded on the failure of both state and revolution. And so what they do is, generally speaking, support justified self-interest among the ones who are being oppressed by the managerial state after being restructured so that national budgets become internationally written, as it were. The difference between national budgets and global capitalism is removed. In that, and I'm not suggesting that the state in general is full of ideas of actual redistribution. I'm not a romantic. But on the other hand, the assumption that the state is not accountable and should be shamed is an assumption, since I'm on the board of, and not now I'm not, but I will be again, of the human rights group at Columbia. You hear this as a kind of given. The first time I heard it, I called my friend, the historian Romila Thapar in Delhi, and I said, Romila, you won't believe it. It's taken, I mean, we who are sort of post-colonial folks, it's taken for granted by young, energetic human rights workers that the state is not accountable. What the hell did we live for? So to an extent, that particular, the decimated state, and then developing the justified self-interest of groups is not to cultivate the subject of human rights. And there, the question that you asked, my friend from that corner, about alternative intelligence, that becomes incredibly important, because that is completely destroyed in this quick collective estimate of justified self-interest, which one must, because I speak to these people after the human rights workers have left, after the victories have been won. And one realizes how it is understood. And so therefore, I do not believe, and I'm not against the human rights folks, please remember, but it is really true that the supplementation is so needed that it's almost unbelievable. I mean, even against dowry, the human rights group goes in, and they're really full of goodwill, full of goodwill. I'm talking about changing, my friend from Newcastle University, you thought I was talking about changing our minds. No, I was talking about rearranging desires. Minds are not changed so easily. No, I can't change minds. But rearranging desires, I mean, what you want, why you want, etc., that is a task that you can confront. And we certainly can't change ourselves. I mean, we're, you know, same old, same old. But at any rate, the group goes into the village, and the women and men dance and sing together beautifully. Ponne bona, ponne bona. They make a video. Ponne bona, ponne bona. We won't accept dowry. We won't give dowry. Okay, so, and they then come back and they say, my God, what a success. But in fact, what they do not know is that the line from beautiful dance and song and social action has been destroyed here. So in fact, all they did do was really enjoy themselves beautifully dancing and singing. And so you see this kind of thing, an inability to understand epistemological damage. It's, what can I say? It's heartbreaking to see, and then coming in, talking about legal seminars, talking about self-interest, as this way. I mean, these, after they leave, these people, the subaltern as it were, cannot think of the fact that they own the state. That takes a great long time. You have to hang around. You have to develop something. You know, in my area, Birbhum, right? There's a lot of killing going on that, you know, fashionable, rational choice leftists who come in as if they're exploring like Livingstone will call Maoism. But the people in my area, they will say there's going to be no violence here. There's going to be, I mean, they're uneducated people, as I say, landless, and they were illiterate until day before yesterday, that there'll be no violence here because of the fact that we have our schools. And they'll say, Didi, don't come at night, don't take the night train, there's been killing in Rampurhat. Now, this is a very different kind of thing from telling them, look, just go to the government and ask for this because this is, will shame the state. This is not the, so it's a complete different attitude within. And what I was saying about at the top is that in the human rights and humanities courses, what is emphasized, I'm thinking of Julie Peters, Tom Keenan, my friends, younger people, what is emphasized is the human rights legalisms. That trumps that preparation through the humanities by looking at a text, someone other's text, and hanging in there. So that was, much more needs to be said, but I have to go on to the other ones. The self-trivialization. Yes, of course, the university trivializes itself. It is not needed this way anymore. And in fact, the university is in hoc to all kinds of industrial demands and so on and so forth. It's not, even when it's non-profit, and it's something that we oldies know very well. I became an assistant professor in 1965, okay, this is a very long time ago. And when I became, good or bad, when I became an assistant professor, the university was the faculty. And the upper administration served the faculty, and the students were a transient population, but the faculty served the students. Slowly through my career, the university is now owned by the administration, corporatized institutions, not also a corporation when it's a private institution. Now, universities are not the same everywhere, my friend, as you know. So that even in the United States, there are universities that are private and that are supported. Today, the difference between private and public is really shook up. But nonetheless, private universities can have a much greater program of corporatization than public universities. And they used to be, being private, also a corporation, but now they're only corporations. I mean, this is I'm recounting a conversation with my vice-chancellor, so it's not a, you know, when he was accusing me of being, no, he's a friend, but, you know, he was saying, Gayatri, your standards are too high. And I said, what are you talking about? Your standards are too low. You know, this, you don't know. You think the only thing that you have to do is to keep the university in the black? That ain't an ideal for a university, and so on. So yes, the university is self-trivialized in my neck of the woods. And remember, once again, and I'm speaking to folks from universities that are less elite as this one, that the university is not something that is uniform. I mean, when I talked about the Africa-led project, that is a new rural, Kwara State University, new rural, dependent upon elections, who becomes the governor. That's a very, and I've seen the students, they are from local rural communities. That's very different from Durham or Columbia. So let's not just say the university, but even so, the university now sees itself, and the humanities departments also, as vocational. Not that there's anything wrong with vocational, but originally the distinction used to be made between polytechnics and gymnasiums and so on, and the university as such. But that doesn't mean that the university as such, even elite Research One universities, opening for-profit campuses here and there all over the world, that's, yes, it's not, it's a trivialization of what John Henry Newman would have called the idea of the university. Yes, I think the university is no longer necessary, and the university is, sees itself as no longer necessary. But I think also that that is not something that we should just accept. So I don't think anything is going to change, because which is why I go to the World Economic Forum. One must, in fact, rearrange the desires of policymakers, because they do have access to power. But on the other hand, I think, therefore, just, you see, in the 60s, many people thought wrongly that transforming the university was a revolution. Just as national liberation is not a revolution, transforming the university is not a revolution either. To an extent, what one has to do is know the limits. And now, for my friend from the University of Newcastle, you know, when I said complicity, remember, I was not talking about conspiratorial arrangements and sort of sub rosa, hidden things, etc. I was using it, as I said, I'm not for etymologism. Like it used to mean this a million years ago, that's why it still means that. That is to completely undo the history of the language. But what I was saying right there at the beginning, that for the sake of transformative behavior, one can, in fact, go back to these root meanings. And so I was using the word complicity in the sense of being folded together. If you want a word in Marx, it's, if you can say, subsumed, but subsumed is not a good word from the English teacher's point of view, because there is that sub there. So once you feel that there's a top and a bottom, you begin to point. Whereas what I say to my students, including the landless, I say to them, whom I will see on the 24th, they on their own, they wanted to come to this talk, and I'm going to give the talk in English. I have to put in Bengali constantly. 4 of them are coming. But the thing is that they, I say to them, look below, don't just look above. There's always a below. So to an extent, subsuming has that problem of, you know, I'm a wordsmith. Words do something to you, right? So therefore, I was not saying we are complicit in the sense of, you know, we are all involved in capitalism, etc. One can say that also. But I was thinking of finding, this is effortful, of finding ways in which we are folded together in terms of the things that we truly want. How long have I said, people think I'm a post-colonial thinker. I'm a critic of post-colonial thinking. How long have I said that it was an enabling violation, that only to say that you want to be against it is bad faith when you clearly don't want to be only against it. So those are the things that I now, at the end of my career, begin to look at as being folded together. Okay, that's what I'm trying. I mean, if that had not been the case, Frantz Fanon would not have gone away from négritude in the middle of his book, where, you know, he has the expérience vécue, the lived experience of blackness, Mama See the Negro, and then he went away from there. At the end of the book, he reads Hegel. He appropriates Hegel, turns the master-slave dialectic on its head. Why does Fanon do that? He could have gone to town on just talking about racism, but he doesn't do that. So to an extent, these are the great models, if you like. So that's what I was talking about, being folded together in ways in which we should, that's waiting for us to discover while we are at work, rather than just thinking that we are against something, because that's, in fact, that's a useful thing on street politics, only if you know that there is a limit to it. That's not, if you win the day, you have not won. You have won something that you needed to win, but that winning brings a loss as well, because you had to ignore the fact that you are folded together in order to get something done. That's short-term work in which we do engage. That's working in the trenches. One does indeed engage in it. So I think an aesthetic You see, that word I chose because I wanted to show that I was folded together with something that is only seen as ideal. But I pointed out that I'm not going into the German 18th century. I'm really using it in terms of, if you read the book, you will see that I say that it's almost indistinguishable from thinking. I'm talking about something which is a little bit different. It's neither rational nor irrational. The imagination is neither rational nor irrational. That place is, for me, the aesthetic, not the German 18th century. So, and I used that kind of bad word because I wanted not to be too clean and talk about political activism. You, Neunica, used the word political activism. I'm not interested in claiming to be a political activist. That's a different kind of thing. I think, imagine, I've met too many full-time activists to claim that one. I'm talking about imaginative activism, which is very hard to learn and always needed. So thank you for your question. I think people have had it. So I could go on forever because I'm on adrenaline, but I will crash too.
Before I thank our speaker, let me just make one announcement. The Durham Castle lecture series is ongoing. If you go to University College website or Durham University website, you will have a look at what's still to come this year. Next lecturer is Richard Sennett, then Saskia Sassen, we have Thomas Pogge, Rowan Williams, and as of today, Noam Chomsky on the 22nd of May. It's a really wonderful set of lectures, and we all hope you will continue to come. So now I want to say something about tonight's lecture. I mean, that was fantastic. It was a fantastic lecture. It was a great evening of engagement. It was a wonderful performance. Adrenaline or no adrenaline, it was a hell of a performance. It was illuminating, and I think we're all pleased this evening to have been folded in with your energy and what you've had to say. So thank you enormously on behalf of all of us.